Is your severance package subject to tax? And if so, how much? Hi, I'm Mike with Cash and Legal, and in this video, I'm going to cover the taxation of severance packages. At the end of this video, you're going to have a better understanding about how much tax is applied to your severance package and what components of your severance package might not be subject to tax. Severance generally refers to compensation that an employer provides to an employee at the end of their employment. If your employment has been terminated without cause, your employer will likely provide you with a severance package. Technically, employers have an obligation to provide notice of termination, but in practice, employers normally provide pay in lieu of notice, which is what we commonly refer to as severance. In Alberta, your employer's obligation to provide severance can be based in either the Employment Standards Code, your employment contract, or the common law. It is important to note that all severance is taxable as income. If your employer is providing you with pay in lieu of notice in connection with the termination of your employment, that pay is income and is subject to tax and withholdings. However, the withholding rates that generally apply to your regular income don't necessarily apply to your severance package. If you receive a lump sum severance payment in connection with the termination of employment, and that lump sum severance is pay in lieu of notice, it will be withheld at a lower rate than your regular rate of pay. Depending on the size of the severance package, the withholding rate can either be 10%, 20%, or 30%. Additionally, there are generally no CPP and EI deductions on these lump sum severance payments. This presents a short-term tax savings opportunities for employees who have lost their employment. When you go to file your tax return the next year, the CRA will look at your total income for the year, and if the amount that was withheld on your severance payment is lower than your effective marginal rate, then you will likely owe additional taxes. Instead of a lump sum severance payment, some employers may opt to provide salary continuance. Salary continuance is different in that it is taxed and withheld like regular income, unlike the lump sum payment. If you want to avoid paying any immediate taxes or withholdings on your severance payment, you can opt to have your severance payment transferred to your RRSP. Provided that your employer agrees and the contribution is made directly by your employer to your RRSP, this is an acceptable way of dealing with your severance. This is of course subject to the qualification that you have adequate contribution room to make this contribution. If you are making a claim against your former employer for severance and you are seeking other damages other than pay in lieu of notice, these other damages may not be taxable. For example, if you're seeking aggravated damages in connection with the termination of your employment, which would arise from improper treatment by your employer during the course of the termination, these aggravated damages may not be subject to taxation. Additionally, if you're seeking general damages because you allege that your employment was terminated in a discriminatory manner, these general damages would not be subject to taxation. It's important to note, however, that aggravated damages and general damages can only be sought in specific sets of circumstances, so you cannot simply mischaracterize a portion of your settlement or your severance as either aggravated or general damages to avoid paying taxes. Another important consideration relating to severance and taxation are the terms of any release that you sign in connection with receiving your severance payment. If you sign a release in connection with receiving your severance payment, it is very likely that that release contains a term addressing tax consequences of that settlement. More specifically, those clauses generally stipulate that any unforeseen tax consequences arising from the settlement will be borne by the employee. For that reason, employees should be very careful about how they allocate severance payments, especially when it comes to taxation issues. If you've been offered a severance package by your employer and you have any questions about that package, do not hesitate to contact our office today and book a consultation.